on behalf of the 8,000 Einstein alumni and our Alumni Association, it's a great pleasure to congratulate the class of 2016 on beginning your wonderful journey. Of course, I was chatting with some of the MD PhD students, so congratulate the class of 2020. The white coats that you're receiving today for your class of 2016 are gifts from the Einstein Alumni Association. We alumni are very proud to be part of this event, and we have a number of us who've come from near and far to join you on this day, and we will be joining you on the stage to help cloak you with your new coat. And I kind of want to channel your moms for a minute. We've strategically pinned the name of the donor of your coat within your coat, and if you would send them a little note of thanks, I think that would be a classy thing to do. And I think your mom might have worded it slightly differently. We remember what it felt like to be new students. I remember it vividly, which I don't remember much vividly from 40 years ago, but I remember it vividly, and it is a real pleasure to have this ceremony join the other ceremonies that will be upcoming, the stethoscope ceremony and the scrub ceremony. So there'll be a few opportunities for you to invite family and friends to join you for these memorable moments at the beginning of your career. So without further ado, I wanted to get to a few musings on global health. I think that there were two possibilities, that they knew I was from Nashville and I was going to be pushing my son's CD. That was one possibility of why they invited me. I think if you live in Nashville, it's not at all tacky to let people know that you can buy this on iTunes. But on a more serious note, I wanted to remind you about some of the roots of Einstein's founding 50 years ago. When we opened our doors here in the 1950s, many qualified Jews, Hispanics, blacks, even women had been blocked from medical school due to either quotas or racism, sexism, or anti-Semitism. That was the world we lived in the mid-1950s, roughly when I was born. In addition, Cold War paranoia loomed very large, and college professors were being targeted by Senator Joseph McCarthy, actually senator from my home state of Wisconsin, where I grew up, and careers were thwarted or destroyed by unconstitutional blacklists. There was no foundation in law to inhibit free speech or freedom of association, and yet we did so at that time. Einstein was literally founded to provide academic freedom and hope for faculty and students alike in that environment, in that atmosphere. And that continued to 1974, that's me over in the corner, and to 2012. That brave first class of 1959 is pictured here, and many of them are members of our Alumni Association. Well, all of them are members, those who were living. So now for what you really came to Einstein today for, which is gross pictures. Everybody wants to come to medical school and see what we have to offer here. So I'm going to tell you how I started my career. I started my career working on a disease called schistosomiasis, also known as bilharzia. And schistosomiasis is an utterly fascinating disease of the human being, which starts out with an egg leaving an infected human into a water supply. That egg then hatches into a miracidium, which is a paramecium-like creature. Those of you from biology class remember the paramecium. Well, the miracidium is something similar, sort of a ciliated creature, which is not infectious to humans, but is infectious to the snail intermediate host. And it has to be the right snail. If you don't have the right snail with the right shell, it won't host the schistosome. This is why on the island of Hispaniola, Haiti is schistosome free and always has been, and Dominican Republic has schistosomiasis and always has had. So there are bizarre circumstances having everything to do with the calcium in the water supply and whether or not the proper snail lives in the proper environment. Once the snail is infected, the parasite morphs into a completely different form, a cercaria. A cercaria has a vague similarity to the human sperm because it has a tail full of energy that permits it to, it has a tropism for human beings, for mammals in general. And if you happen to be walking in the water where there's swimming cercaria, the cercaria will swim and penetrate and lose its head into your body and leave its tail behind. And it is now going to get into your bloodstream. It's going to either migrate to your mesenteric plexus, bathing the GI tract, your gastrointestinal tract, or it's going to bathe the blood supply of your bladder. So depending upon which species of schistosome it goes into one venue or the other. It looks for a mate, and when the opposite sex shows up, you end up with this male-female pair that copulate in perpetuum. And they will then produce eggs. Those are the three major human species of eggs, the Mancini at the top, Japonicum in the middle, and the Hematobium at the bottom. What the parasite wants to do is get those eggs back into the water supply to produce another cycle, but many of those are backwashed into the bladder or into the liver, where they cause fibrosis and human disease. So this utterly improbable and fascinating parasitic life cycle was taught to me by Murray Whitner and Herb Tanowitz in an auditorium similar to this one over in Belfer. That was, Alan, 38 years ago or so. And I was utterly taken by the fascination of these amazing stories, these biological wonders of adaptation and persistence. And I wondered how we might do a better job not only curing this disease, because it was incurable at the time, short of using very toxic drugs. So we were only treating heavily infected people. We didn't even treat you if you were lightly infected because the drugs were worse than the disease. But also how to prevent this in a public health sphere. And if you look up here is the Miracidium that I was telling you about. Here's one of the snails. Here's the cercaria. They grow in this sort of slow-moving water with a lot of vegetation. Here's another example where the snails like to live. This is where people wash their clothes, where the kids play, sometimes where the kids go to school. And here is the fibrotic change, which can result in a disease not vastly dissimilar from cirrhosis, with the exception that cirrhosis, you end up typically poisoning the cells and you end up with jaundice. So if you have cirrhosis-like disease without jaundice, you should think of schistosomiasis. Now, the happy story here is that with economic development, with achievements in diagnostics and therapeutic insights, the development of safe and effective anti-schistosomal drugs, success in environmental control of the snail intermediate host, provision of water supply to someone's home so they don't have to wash in the contaminated river, and molluscicides, actually killing snails. China has radically reduced the number of persons infected with or exposed to schistosomas, and Brazil has done the same. Many parts of Africa have done the same. And even part of the United States. This is Puerto Rico in my wife's honor. And hay bilhartia, no se bañe. There's bilhartia here, don't wash. Virtually eradicated from Puerto Rico, which is the first place I did my schistosomiasis research with the CDC in San Juan in 1981. In any case, schistosomiasis is still a scourge globally. There's still a small army of researchers trying to do even better than that, like a vaccine. Nonetheless, tremendous progress has been made, and it gives us enormous hope that we can also make progress with other worms known in the field as helminths. I also worked on malaria early in my career, still dabble, and this is an anopheline mosquito. It's got that sort of Olympic sort of style, javelin in the ground look to it. This is not an anopheline. This is the Aedes aegypti mosquito with the sort of salt and pepper shape, salt and pepper coloring of the body, and it's got a very different stance when it's feeding on your blood. And this is the vector of yellow fever and, more relevantly in our part of the world, dengue fever. And of course, this is amenable to control with bed nets, with insecticides, and with diagnosis and treatment. Nonetheless, killing 2 million people a year, most of whom are children, particularly in Africa, where the intensity of transmission is so great. Some progress on the vaccine front, continued need for drug development due to resistance, continued need for innovation in field management, but ultimately a disease that we should be able to control much better than we do if we can have the global commitment to do so. When I was here at Einstein as a young faculty member, I was training at Columbia and started out in my assistant professor's years there, but was happily lured back in 1985. I met Cy Romney, who was chairman of the OBGYN department prior to my arrival and was still a very active investigator, and Cy passed away just recently. I think it was last year at the ripe old age of somewhere in the age of 92. And Cy Seymour Romney was the author of a classic textbook in OBGYN, and he introduced me to a talented molecular biologist with whom I just spent an hour, Robbie Burke, and we became an active team. I saw Ellie Schoenbaum in the audience, and Ellie remembers when we started out a project here at Einstein in the late 80s, asking questions about whether HIV-infected women who would be immunosuppressed might increase their risk of cervical cancer, which we knew at that time to be mediated by human papillomavirus. And we knew this to be true because women who suffered things like the need for renal transplant for kidney disease had higher incidence rates of cervical cancer, which had been thought to be associated with the immunosuppressive phenomenon. And if you distort countries' geography by how many what their death rates are from cervical cancer, you see quite a skinny North America where pap smear screening and Western Europe, pap smear screening has substantially reduced the incidence of cervical cancer. And you see the ballooning of Africa and Asia, countries like India, where we have made very little progress. In the 1930s, Papanikolaou did his research at Cornell down the street here and published a classic monograph in the late 40s. So we've had pap smear screening all that time, and yet it has not penetrated into the world's low and middle income countries. Even Brazil has embarrassingly high cervical cancer rates because of an inability to mobilize cervical cancer screening. So all of this interested us greatly in launching this study, these studies here at Einstein in the late 1980s. I've carried that work forward and helped sponsor the growth of a nurse-led cervical cancer prevention program in Zambia. Zambia, for those of you who don't remember, is in southern Africa. It's a landlocked country surrounded by about 8 other countries. We've worked in Lusaka, the capital city. You go half an hour out of Lusaka and you are in the bush. And these nurses were taught by people like Dr. Mulindi Mwanahamuntu and Dr. Grosbeck Parham, Dr. Parham is an American gynecologist who developed a lot of these techniques with the visual inspection with acetic acid. What's acetic acid? It's a vinegar, and you can get vinegar anywhere in the world. You can make it anywhere in the world. Paint the cervix with vinegar, and you'll see changes on the squamous epithelium if, in fact, the woman has abnormalities due to human papillomavirus screening. So no, it's not pap smear, but it's infinitely easier. And we've had tremendous success rolling this out. We have over, what's wrong with good old-fashioned New York City tap water? I'll take this, but next time, Alan, we want the tap water up here. That's a joke. You know what the largest unfiltered water supply is in the entire world? New York City. You want to know why we don't filter our water, our drinking water? Because we don't need to. We have such superb management of the upstate reservoirs, and the quality of the water is so good that all we have to do is carry it through conventional treatment without filtering it and chlorinate it. However, New York City, in its wisdom, decided that they couldn't guarantee the security of their reservoirs 50 years from now. And they have initiated one of the largest public works projects in the history of mankind, the filtration of the New York City water supply, and it's going to take them 30 years with billions of dollars of investment to complete this, and that's to protect people 50 years from now. And so that's a certain political leadership that we have in New York State that looks ahead on public health issues, 20, 30, 50 years. So keep that in mind when you vote in November. In any case, we're very proud of this program. We've calculated that we've saved thousands of women's lives already, and we feel like, honestly, these simple, user-friendly, affordable strategies need to be promulgated. The value of our program, we actually take a photograph, use it with a very high-resolution camera. It's pretty much free because it's just digital, and we can then use that to train and retrain the nurses until the nurses get just as good as the best gynecologist in visually inspecting the cervix. Now, I was in New York City for the 1980s, from the time I got back from my stint at the London School and in Puerto Rico at the CDC until I went to the NIH in late 1988. And that was the decade where every clinician in the city was affected by HIV disease, because we didn't know what the heck was happening early on, but before long it was like a tsunami of disease and death. I remember seeing a kid when I was attending at Montefiore in 1985 who was one of the sickest children I'd ever taken care of in my life. I mean, this was a kid who rivaled the smallest preemie in the pediatric ICU. It was a kid who had such severe oral thrush or candida of the mouth and the esophagus that when the child cried, you couldn't even hear the child, and the child couldn't swallow. And Montefiore was one of the hospitals, along with Jacobi, that embraced HIV from the very start, never had any ambivalence about it. I had just come from another major medical center in New York, which did everything it possibly could to drive AIDS patients out to the affiliate hospitals, didn't want them in our hospital. And I think that institution is ashamed of that legacy and now is a leading light of AIDS research and care, but at the time did the wrong thing out of fear, and rather than leading the way that Einstein did, it was avoiding. So I got into HIV very much by accident. It was just a disease that presented itself. I was working on cervical cancer and HPV at the time, and we asked some questions around HIV, and with Ellie and her colleagues, many of whom are still here, Peter Selwyn, we were able to do a body of work here that I thought was important. In any case, this is where you see HIV around the world. The brown-colored countries have more than 1 million people each, including our country. And we have 7,000 new HIV infections every day, 1,000 of which are in children. So if you pick up The Economist or any other magazine and it says the end of AIDS, question mark, or the end of AIDS in our lifetime, that's aspirational. That's what people do to inspire other people as to what might be true. It's not particularly realistic from a scientist's point of view. And we continue to have a huge global HIV epidemic. We have good news and we have bad news. The bad news I just showed you. The good news is we are, in fact, scaling up HIV treatment in a very substantial way. Best thing George Bush did, in my view, as president was the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief, PEPFAR, which had broad bipartisan support. Senator Frist from my state of Tennessee and Senator Kennedy from Massachusetts worked tirelessly on this issue. It was something where Republicans and Democrats agreed. We had a global emergency. Africa was its epicenter. Something had to be done. And I think this is the largest foreign aid activity, single topic foreign aid activity in U.S. history, and it has made a tremendous difference in stemming the tide of death and disability. The HIV Prevention Trials Network that Steve mentioned, that I've been heading for the last 6 years, has had a study completed last year, the HPTN 052 protocol, in which we had over 1,700 discordant couples on 4 continents, and we found that if we treated the HIV-infected member of that couple before it was indicated according to WHO criteria, so before they had a low CD4 count or low T cell count, we found that, we stopped transmission to the uninfected partner 96% of the time, which is by far the most efficacious prevention strategy ever discovered. So now, doing the right thing for the HIV-infected person, which is to stem the tide of disease progression, is also the right thing from a public health strategy because it helps reduce their infectiousness to others. Very convenient that the clinical paradigm and the public health paradigm are one and the same. Doesn't surprise some of us ID types because that's been our strategy for tuberculosis control and control of sexually transmitted infections forever, is case finding, treatment, contact tracing. Treat the individual, avoid infection to others. We can cure those other diseases. We can't cure HIV, and that is the topic of intense current investigation. Now, we'd love to identify everybody with HIV, offer them therapy, have them take the therapy, and wipe out the epidemic. But that's an aspiration, and you have to meet reality. This is something that we first reported in this paper, and then CDC picked it up and did an even more thorough job, and this is their most recent estimate. So we think we have about 1.2 million people with HIV in the US. Only 80% of them know their status, so 20% of them don't even know they're HIV infected. Of those people who know their status, only 77% are linked to HIV care. Estimates in the Western European democracies are in excess of 98% are linked to care. We get 77% linked to care with our chaotic healthcare system. Of the people linked to care, only 2/3 are retained in care. Of the 2/3 retained in care, we don't treat all of them with ART. We treat most of them, but they're 11% not on ART, antiretroviral therapy. And of the people on antiretroviral therapy, only about 3/4 actually are taking their medicines in a diligent enough way that they actually suppress their viral load. So when you do the math, only 28% of HIV-infected Americans have optimal suppression, suppression spelled in an odd way, of virus. And so we are not doing such a hot job in the US in deploying the treatment as prevention paradigm. And I suspect I'll be spending the bulk of the next 15 years of my career on this topic. What we'd like to do is more testing, better linkage, increase retention in care, offer early combination antiretroviral therapy, and increase adherence. Now, a big part of increasing adherence as Ellie Schoenbaum was. Where are you, Ellie? I keep referring to you. I've lost you. You're here somewhere. There you are. Okay, there's Ellie. So as Ellie knows, she was one of the mainstays of the program in the Bronx where you had methadone treatment and HIV care completely integrated. Now, I'll show you 10 papers that have been published in the last 20 minutes with the great discovery that you should integrate HIV care with comorbidities, like drug addiction, as a classic example, like co-infection with tuberculosis. Make it easy for people to get their HIV care. Integrate their problem with alcoholism with their problem with HIV. Einstein was way ahead, and Montefiore, way ahead of the curve on this. And we now appreciate that a huge proportion of people who are non-adherent to their medication are because they have mental health or substance abuse comorbidities. So ultimately, we think that is a vital lesson. I'm going to end by telling you a little bit about our work in Mozambique. Here's Malawi, here's South Africa, so that's Mozambique. And we work in a remote rural province called Zambia province, but don't be fooled, this is quite populous, 4 million people in this province, the size of Connecticut. And we are helping the Mozambicans manage clinical care sites scattered throughout the province. This one is my favorite, Chinde. Although that's the capital of the province, Quelimane, the roads and infrastructure is so bad that we have to drive here and then we have to take a boat to get to Chinde. It's the only way we can get there. So very different environment than any place I've worked before. A typical clinic, despite the fact that you have electricity lines going overhead, there are no electricity lines to this clinic. There is no electricity, there's no water in this clinic. That is a beleaguered nurse who is coping with this all day long. And her drug supply runs out by the 10th day of the month and her suture material by the 15th day. I'm making the numbers up, but you got the picture. That this is not an optimal environment. People don't like to practice medicine or nursing in this kind of environment. They don't feel they're doing their patients justice. And there are many, many patients in need. And some of the work that we're doing, led by Phil Chiampa, an assistant professor in my group, with Jose Tiki, one of our students from Mozambique, who's a physician doing his MPH with us, back doing his master's thesis. Make a long story short, we found that 25% of babies who needed early infant diagnosis from their HIV-infected mothers were being brought to care. But 50% of the mothers came back for their own care. Now, what's wrong with that? Don't mothers typically take care of their babies much better than they actually take care of themselves? That's been my 30-year, 35-year experience as a pediatrician. They take care of the babies much better than they take care of themselves. So we figured something was amiss, and we went to do qualitative interviews and find out what was wrong with our program that so few mothers came back. We found out they didn't understand the instructions they were being given because all the healthcare providers spoke the national language Portuguese. Most of the mothers were so poor, they'd only had a couple of years of formal training. They spoke rudimentary Portuguese, good enough to sell and buy in the marketplace, not good enough to understand complex directions about their postpartum care. So we then changed the structure of our discharge from postpartum. We walked the mothers over to the AIDS clinic. We registered the mom, registered the baby, explained in the local language what they needed, and that was our results, taking it from the baseline of about 30% to 65%. That's called quality improvement research. That's called implementation science. That's called outcomes research. It's a kind of research that is designed to improve programs. It's the kind of research we're doing at Weiler, at Montefiore, at Jacobi. It's the kind of research that we're trying to improve the efficiency of medical care, reduce the cost, and get better outcomes, which is actually possible. I remember when I was a pediatric intern at Columbia Presbyterian that we had all of the tubes for adults in our new neonatal nursery. And I went to the head nurse and I said, we never use these tubes. They're just there, and then they expire, and then we discard them, and then why don't we get rid of all these adult tubes? We never, ever use them. And when I was a senior resident, I came back 2 years later, they were still there. So the reality is we are inefficient in our healthcare system. And even in places that have beleaguered healthcare systems, we're in a position to substantially improve things, even with the money we've got. So thanks for your attention and congratulations. I am very proud to be standing here in front of you. I get a warm and fuzzy thinking about coming in here in 1974. And I hope that your time at Einstein will be as gratifying and rewarding and meaningful as mine was. And like was said earlier, you'll meet friends for life, maybe not a spouse, maybe, but certainly you'll meet friends for life. And we hope that you'll be proud to be joining us as Einstein alumni in just 4 to 8 years. Thank you.